The gunshot that split the afternoon air was meant for him. But Dawson Carter had been riding fence lines since before dawn, and her father's aim was off by inches. She watched from the hayloft as the cowboy on the dappled mare wheeled his horse around, hands raised high, while her father chambered another round into his Winchester. "I told you what happens to cowboys on my land," Samuel Carter's voice carried across the dusty yard of their homestead outside Concordia, Kansas, the late summer heat of 1882 making the air shimmer between them. "You got 5 seconds to get gone before the next one finds its mark." Dawson pressed herself against the rough wooden slats, her heart hammering against her ribcage. The cowboy sat perfectly still atop his horse, his brown Stetson shading a face she could not quite see from this distance. But something about the set of his shoulders told her he was not the type to run from anything. She held her breath, waiting for him to bolt, but instead he lowered his hands slowly and spoke. "Sir, I am looking for work, not trouble. The foreman at the Hutchinson Ranch said you might need hands for the harvest. The foreman at Hutchinson should have told you I do not hire cowboys. I do not hire drifters. I do not hire men who think they can sweet-talk their way into stealing what I have built." Her father advanced 3 steps, the rifle steady at his shoulder. "My daughter is 19 years old, and every worthless saddle tramp from here to Abilene thinks he can charm his way into her good graces and my bank account. Now you get off my property before I put a hole through that fancy shirt." The cowboy tipped his hat, turned his horse, and rode away at an unhurried trot that somehow seemed more defiant than if he had galloped. Dawson watched him go, watched the dust settle back onto the rutted road, and felt something hot and sharp twist in her chest. This was the 4th man her father had run off this month, the 7th this summer, and none of them had been anywhere near her, had not even known she existed until her father made his dramatic pronouncements. She climbed down from the loft and found her father in the kitchen, cleaning his rifle with methodical strokes that spoke of long practice. He did not look up when she entered. "You could have killed him." "I was not aiming to kill. I was aiming to educate. He was just looking for work, Daddy. The Hutchinson Ranch is 3 miles from here. He probably did not even know whose land he crossed." Samuel Carter set down the cleaning rod and met her eyes with that flint-hard gaze that had seen him through the war, through the death of her mother, through 20 years of making this unforgiving prairie yield enough to keep them fed. "You think I do not know what men like that want? They see a pretty girl and a prosperous farm, and they think they can ride in here and take it all. Well, not while I am breathing. So I am supposed to die an old maid because you have decided every man in Kansas is a villain. You will marry when I find someone suitable. A shopkeeper, maybe. A banker. Someone with roots and a future that does not involve wandering from town to town." Dawson felt her hands curl into fists at her sides. "And what if I want something different? Then you are a fool, and I raised you better than that." She left the house before she said something she could not take back, walked out past the barn to where the wheat fields stretched golden and heavy in the August sun. The air smelled of dust and coming rain, that particular scent of the prairie before a storm. She had lived her whole life within 20 miles of this spot, had watched the seasons turn and the crops grow and the cattle low in their pens, and she had never once wondered if there was something beyond the horizon until her father started shooting at it. That night, she lay awake in her narrow bed and listened to the wind rattling the shutters, and she made a promise to herself that felt reckless and necessary in equal measure. She would marry a cowboy. Not because she wanted to defy her father, though that was part of it, but because she wanted to choose her own life instead of having it chosen for her. She wanted someone who understood the pull of the open range, who knew what it meant to chase something beyond the safety of fences and property lines. The next morning she rode into Concordia on the pretext of buying thread and buttons, but what she really wanted was information. The town was small, just a handful of streets clustered around the railroad depot, but it was the beating heart of Republic County, and every cowboy within 50 miles passed through sooner or later. She tied her horse outside Mitchell's general store and went inside, where Agnes Mitchell was arranging bolts of calico on the counter. "Dawson Carter, as I live and breathe. What brings you to town on a Monday? Shopping, and maybe a bit of conversation." Dawson ran her hand over a bolt of blue gingham, not really seeing it. "I heard there are cowboys looking for work around here." Agnes's eyebrows climbed toward her steel-gray hair. "Your daddy know you are asking about cowboys. My daddy does not need to know everything I think about." "Lord have mercy." Agnes leaned across the counter, her eyes bright with interest. "You are planning something, girl. I can see it written all over your face." "I am planning to live my own life, is all." Agnes studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "There is a cattle outfit camped about 2 miles west of town, near the river. They drove a herd up from Texas and they are resting the stock before pushing on to Nebraska. Might be 30 men with them, including the trail boss. They will be there another week at least." "What's the trail boss's name?" "Zane. Morgan Zane. Young fellow, maybe 25 or 26, but folks say he knows cattle better than anyone this side of the Platte." Agnes paused, then added carefully, "They also say he is honest, which is more than you can claim for most men in his profession." Dawson bought thread she did not need and rode home slowly, thinking. A cattle outfit meant men who lived in the saddle, who measured their year in miles instead of seasons. Her father would shoot every one of them if they came within rifle range of the farm, but what if she went to them instead? The idea was audacious and improper, and exactly the kind of thing a respectable young woman in 1882 Kansas should never consider. Which was why Dawson found herself saddling her horse at dawn 2 days later, before her father woke, and riding west toward the river with her heart in her throat. She found the camp just where Agnes said it would be, a sprawl of canvas tents and rope corrals holding several hundred head of cattle. The sun was barely up, but the camp was already alive with activity, men rolling bedrolls and stoking fires and checking cinches on saddles. She reined in at the edge of the camp, suddenly aware of how conspicuous she was, a lone woman on horseback with her dark hair braided down her back and her father's old pistol heavy on her hip. A man detached himself from the group around the fire and walked toward her. He was tall, with dark hair that needed cutting and eyes the color of weathered wood, and he moved with the easy grace of someone who spent more time on horseback than on foot. He stopped a respectful distance from her horse and pushed his hat back. "Morning, miss. You lost." "No. I am looking for Morgan Zane. You found him." His voice was deep, with a hint of Texas drawl softened by years on the trail. "What can I do for you?" Up close, she could see he was younger than she expected, probably not more than 24 or 25. But there was something in his face that spoke of hard miles and harder decisions. He had a scar along his jawline, thin and white against his sun-darkened skin, and his hands, when he hooked his thumbs in his belt, were calloused and capable. "I need to hire a cowboy." Morgan Zane's expression did not change, but something flickered in his eyes that might have been amusement. "For what purpose?" "To help me with something." Dawson could feel the blood rising in her cheeks, but she forced herself to hold his gaze. "Something that requires someone who is not afraid of my father." "Your father the shooting type?" "Yes, I see." Morgan rubbed his jaw, considering. "And what exactly would this cowboy be helping you with?" "That is between me and whoever I hire." Fair enough. But you should know that my men have obligations. We are contracted to deliver this herd to Ogallala by the end of September, and I cannot spare anyone until that is done. Dawson's heart sank. How long will that take? 6 weeks, maybe 7, depending on weather and water. He studied her face, and his expression softened slightly. You look like someone with a problem that will not wait 6 weeks. It is not that urgent, it is just... She stopped, unsure how to explain the urgency she felt without sounding like a spoiled child. I need to make a point. About cowboys. About choosing my own life. Morgan was quiet for a moment, and she had the sense that he understood more than she had said. I am sorry I cannot help you right now, but if you are still of the same mind when we come back through in October, we can talk then. October was 2 months away. 2 months of her father's suspicious glances and his rifle by the door and his endless lectures about suitable men. 2 months of watching the horizon and wondering if she was brave enough to actually follow through with her half-formed plans. I will be of the same mind, she said. Then I will see you in October. He touched the brim of his hat, a gesture that was somehow both casual and courtly. Ride safe, miss. She turned her horse and rode away feeling foolish and frustrated and strangely exhilarated. She had done it, had ridden out to a cattle camp and spoken to a trail boss and not been laughed at or dismissed. Morgan Zane had taken her seriously, had treated her like someone whose business mattered. It was more than most men in Concordia would have done. Her father was waiting in the yard when she got home, his face dark with anger. Where have you been? Riding. Riding where? Out. Dawson dismounted and began unsaddling her horse, her hands steady despite the hammering of her heart. I am 19 years old, Daddy. I do not need permission to go for a morning ride. You do, when there are cattle outfits camped within spitting distance of town. You think I do not hear things. You think Agnes Mitchell does not talk. He grabbed her arm, forcing her to face him. You went to that camp, did you not? I went to town. What I did there is my business. The slap came so fast, she did not have time to flinch, his open hand catching her across the cheek, hard enough to snap her head sideways. She tasted blood where her teeth cut the inside of her mouth, and for a moment the world went white and ringing. When her vision cleared, her father was standing with his hand still raised, his face stricken. Dawson, I do not. She stepped back, her hand pressed to her burning cheek. Do not apologize, just do not ever do it again. She led her horse into the barn and stood there in the dimness, waiting for her hands to stop shaking. Her father had never hit her before, not once in 19 years, and she knew he was already drowning in regret. But that did not change what had happened, did not erase the sting of his palm or the terrible silence that followed. She did not speak to him for 3 days. They moved around each other like strangers, sharing meals in silence, working side by side in the fields without exchanging a word. On the 4th day he tried to apologize and she cut him off. I know you are sorry, but you need to understand something. I am going to marry a cowboy, Daddy. I am going to choose a man who lives the way I want to live, who sees the world as bigger than 300 acres of wheat. And you can accept that, or you can shoot at it, but you cannot stop it. Dawson, please, I am done arguing about this. She walked away and did not look back. The summer bled into autumn, the days shortening and the wheat coming in heavy and golden. Dawson worked the harvest beside the hired men, local farmers who came to help with the understanding that her father would return the favor when their time came. None of them were cowboys. None of them made her pulse quicken or her breath catch. They were good men, steady men, and she felt nothing when they smiled at her. In late September, she rode into town again and found Agnes behind the counter of the general store, sorting mail. That cattle outfit comes back through next week. Agnes said without preamble. They will be heading south to Winter Range in Texas. Word is they are looking to hire on a few local men for the drive. How do you know? Because Morgan Zane was in here yesterday buying supplies and he mentioned it. He also asked about you. Dawson's heart did a strange little skip. What did he ask? Wanted to know if you were spoken for. I told him no, but that your father had strong opinions about cowboys. Agnes's eyes were sharp and knowing. He said he remembered. What else did he say? That he would be camped at the same spot by the river if anyone needed to find him. Dawson rode home slowly, her mind spinning. Morgan Zane had remembered her, had asked about her, had made sure she knew where to find him. It felt like a door opening, like a path appearing in the darkness. She had two choices. She could stay safe behind her father's fences and marry whoever he eventually approved of, or she could ride out to that camp and see what happened next. That night she lay awake until she heard her father's snoring settle into a steady rhythm, then rose and dressed in the darkness. She packed a small bag with clothes and the money she had saved from selling eggs and butter, and she wrote a note that said simply, "I am choosing my own life. I will send word when I can. Do not come looking for me." She left the note on the kitchen table and slipped out into the cool October night. The stars were brilliant overhead, the Milky Way a river of light across the black vault of the sky. She saddled her horse in the barn, moving by feel and memory, and led him quietly down the lane until she was far enough from the house that the sound of hooves would not wake her father. Then she mounted and rode west toward the river, toward the cattle camp, and whatever came next. The camp was quiet when she arrived, just the low murmur of sleeping cattle and the occasional stamp of a hoof. A single man sat watch by a banked fire, and he straightened when he saw her approaching. "Hold up there. State your business." "I am looking for Morgan Zane." The man studied her for a moment, taking in her bag and her determined expression, then jerked his head toward a tent set slightly apart from the others. "That is the boss's tent, but you might want to wait until morning too. I cannot wait." She dismounted and walked to the tent, her legs unsteady beneath her. This was it, the moment when she stepped off the edge of everything familiar and safe. She took a breath and called softly, "Mr. Zane." There was a rustling inside, then the tent flap opened and Morgan Zane emerged, shirtless and rumpled with sleep. He blinked at her in the firelight and she saw the exact moment when recognition hit. "Miss Carter, it is the middle of the night." "I know. I am sorry, but I need to talk to you." He pulled on his shirt and buttoned it quickly, then gestured toward the fire. "Let us move away from the tents. No sense waking the whole camp." They walked to the edge of the firelight and stood facing each other. Up close she could see the sleep still heavy in his eyes, the shadow of stubble on his jaw. He looked younger somehow, less guarded, and she felt a flutter of nervousness that had nothing to do with what she was about to ask. "You said in October we could talk," she began. "Well, it is October." "So it is." He studied her face and something shifted in his expression. "You ran away. It was not a question. I left. There is a difference. Does your father know where you are? Not yet, but he will figure it out by morning." Morgan rubbed the back of his neck, a gesture she was coming to recognize as his way of buying time to think. "Miss Carter, I do not make a habit of getting between daughters and their fathers. That is a good way to end up shot. I am not asking you to come between us. I am asking you to hire me." "Hire you? For the drive to Texas? You said you were looking for hands." "I was looking for experienced cowboys, not—" He stopped, clearly searching for diplomatic words. "Not what? Not girls. I can ride as well as any man in your outfit, and I am not afraid of hard work." "I do not doubt that. But a cattle drive is no place for a woman. We are in the saddle 16 hours a day, sleeping on the ground, eating dust and beans. And that is when everything goes right. When things go wrong, you have stampedes and river crossings and whether that can kill you. I know all that. I am not some delicate flower who needs protecting. I have lived on a farm my whole life. I know hard work. It is not the work I am worried about. Morgan's voice was quiet, serious. It is the fact that your father will come after you, and when he does, someone is going to get hurt, probably me. He will not find us once we are on the trail. You do not know that. Dawson stepped closer, close enough that she could see the faint freckles across his cheekbones, the way his eyes were more green than brown in the firelight. Please, I am not asking for charity or special treatment. I will earn my keep. I just need a chance to prove I can. Morgan held her gaze for a long moment, and she watched him wage some internal battle with himself. Finally, he sighed, a sound of resignation and maybe something else. All right, but you work like everyone else, no exceptions, and if your father shows up with that rifle, you are on your own. Fair enough. We leave at first light. Get some sleep while you can. You can use my tent. I will bunk with the men. I can sleep on the ground like everyone else. The ground is fine once we are on the trail. Tonight you take the tent. His tone made it clear there would be no argument. Welcome to the outfit, Miss Carter. She did not sleep. She lay in Morgan Zane's tent, smelling leather and wood smoke on the blankets, listening to the sounds of the camp, and tried not to think about her father waking to find her gone. He would be furious and terrified in equal measure, would probably ride into town and raise the alarm and maybe even go to the sheriff. But by then, she would be miles south, following a herd of cattle toward a horizon she had only imagined. Dawn came cold and clear, the sky turning from black to gray to pale gold. Dawson emerged from the tent to find the camp already breaking down around her, men rolling canvas and loading wagons with practiced efficiency. Morgan was checking the cinch on a big bay gelding, and he looked up when she approached. You know how to work cattle? Some. Mostly I have worked horses. All right. You will ride swing position with Garrett. He will show you what to do. He pointed to a young cowboy with red hair and a friendly face. Stay alert and do not crowd the herd. Cattle spook easy when they first start moving. Garrett proved to be about her age, with an easy manner and a patience that she appreciated as she learned the rhythm of the drive. The work was harder than she expected. Hours of riding in the dust kicked up by 2,000 hooves, keeping the stragglers moving and the leaders from breaking away. By midday, her throat was raw and her eyes stinging, and she understood why the men tied bandanas over their faces. They know one by a creek, letting the cattle drink and graze while the cook passed around cold biscuits and jerky. Dawson sat apart from the men, aware that her presence was causing whispers and sidelong glances. Morgan came and sat beside her, his own biscuit untouched. How are you holding up? I am fine. You do not have to pretend with me. This is hard work, especially the first day. I said I am fine. She met his eyes, challenging him to contradict her. He studied her for a moment, then bit into his biscuit. You have got grit, I will give you that. But grit only takes you so far. Out here you also need judgment and luck and a healthy respect for everything that can go wrong. Are you trying to scare me? I am trying to prepare you. There is a difference. They rode on through the afternoon, the sun beating down fierce and hot despite the October date. Dawson's legs ached from hours in the saddle, and her shoulders burned from the unfamiliar angle of the work, but she kept her face neutral and her complaints to herself. She would not give Morgan Zane any reason to regret hiring her. When they finally stopped for the night, she was so tired she could barely stand. She helped with the horses, working mechanically, then collected her bedroll and walked to the edge of camp. Morgan found her there as she was spreading her blankets. You did good today. I did adequate. There is a difference, he laughed, a sound that transformed his serious face into something younger and warmer. Fair enough. But adequate is better than most manage their first day. Get some rest. Tomorrow will not be any easier. She slept like the dead and woke to gray pre-dawn light and the smell of coffee. The routine was the same: break camp and move out with the sun, pushing the herd south toward the Kansas-Oklahoma border. The landscape changed slowly around them, the flat prairie giving way to rolling hills and scattered stands of oak and cottonwood. At night, they camped by creeks and springs, and gradually Dawson learned the names and faces of the men she rode with. There was Garrett, the redhead who treated her like a younger sister. Cole, the segundo who rarely spoke but had eyes like a hawk and never missed a thing. Sam and Thomas, brothers from Missouri who sang while they rode. Old Pete, the cook, who made surprisingly good coffee and terrible jokes. And Morgan, who was everywhere at once, riding point and checking the flanks and settling disputes with quiet authority. On the 5th day, they crossed into Oklahoma territory and stopped at a trading post to resupply. Morgan gave the men leave to visit the saloon while he settled accounts with the trader, and Dawson took the opportunity to wash her clothes in the creek behind the buildings. She was wringing out her spare shirt when she heard hoofbeats approaching fast. She looked up to see her father riding toward the trading post, his rifle across his saddle and his face set in hard lines. Her heart dropped like a stone. She ran back to the trading post, her wet clothes clutched in her hands, and found Morgan coming out the door. "My father is here." Morgan's expression did not change, but she saw his jaw tighten. "Stay behind me." Samuel Carter reined in his horse in the yard, his eyes finding Dawson immediately. "Get your things. We are going home." "No. This is not a discussion, Dawson." "You are coming home if I have to tie you to your horse." Morgan stepped forward, positioning himself between Dawson and her father. "Sir, your daughter is here of her own free will. She has proven herself a capable hand, and I have no intention of sending her away." Samuel Carter's rifle came up to his shoulder in one smooth motion. "And I have no intention of letting some drifting cowboy steal my daughter. Now step aside before I put a hole through you." "Daddy, no." Dawson pushed past Morgan, her hands raised. "Please, I am not being stolen. I am choosing this. I am choosing my own life. By running away in the night, by throwing yourself at the first saddle tramp who will have you." Her father's voice cracked with fury and pain. "I raised you better than this. You raised me to be independent and strong-minded, and then you got angry when I turned out that way." Dawson could feel tears pricking her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "I love you, Daddy, but I cannot live the life you want for me. I have to find my own way." "Your way is going to get you killed or worse. These men are not your friends, Dawson. They are using you." "No one is using anyone." Morgan's voice was calm, reasonable. "Your daughter asked for work and I gave it to her. That is all." "That is not all, and we both know it." Samuel swung the rifle toward Morgan. "I see the way you look at her. You think I am blind." Morgan went very still, and Dawson saw something flicker across his face that might have been guilt. "Sir, I have been nothing but respectful to your daughter." "Respect would have been sending her home the minute she showed up at your camp. Respect would have been coming to me and asking permission. Instead, you helped her run away, and now you stand there and tell me it is her choice." Samuel's finger tightened on the trigger. "Well, here is my choice." The shot that followed was deafening, but it did not come from Samuel's rifle. It came from Cole, the segundo, who had emerged from the saloon and fired his pistol into the air. The sharp crack made everyone freeze, and in the moment of startled silence, Cole walked forward with his gun still raised. "That is enough. Nobody is shooting anybody today." Samuel turned his rifle toward Cole. "Stay out of this, boy." Cannot do that, sir. Morgan is my boss and my friend, and I am not going to stand by while you murder him over a misunderstanding. Cole's voice was steady, utterly without fear. Put the rifle down and let us talk this through like civilized people. For a long moment no one moved. Then Samuel lowered his rifle slowly, his face gray beneath the weathering. There is nothing to talk about. My daughter is coming home with me. I am not. Dawson stepped forward, her voice clear and firm. I am sorry, Daddy. I know this is not what you wanted, but I am not a child anymore, and you cannot protect me from the world by locking me away. I need to see what is out there. I need to know who I am outside of your farm. And you think you are going to find that following cattle across Oklahoma? Maybe. Maybe not. But I will never know if I do not try. Samuel looked at her for a long time, and she saw the moment when something broke inside him. His shoulders sagged and he suddenly looked old, older than his 50 years. You are just like your mother, stubborn and fearless and bound to break my heart. Mama would have understood. Your mama would have had my hide for letting you go, but she is not here and I cannot fight both of you. He straightened, gathering the remnants of his dignity. If you are going to do this, you do it right. You stay with the outfit until spring, then you come home and we talk about your future. No more running, no more secrets. I can live with that. And you? Samuel turned to Morgan, his eyes hard. You keep her safe. You make sure she eats and sleeps and does not get herself killed doing something foolish. If anything happens to her, I will hunt you to the ends of the earth. Are we clear? Crystal clear, sir. Samuel nodded once, a sharp jerk of his head, then turned his horse and rode away without looking back. Dawson watched him go, her throat tight with emotions she could not name. Relief and grief and something that might have been freedom, all tangled together until she could not tell which was which. Morgan touched her shoulder gently. You all right? I do not know. Ask me tomorrow. That night they camped by a river, the water running dark and swift between steep banks. Dawson sat by the fire long after the others had turned in, staring at the flames and replaying the confrontation with her father in her head. She heard footsteps behind her and knew without looking that it was Morgan. Mind if I sit? It is your fire. He settled beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth of his shoulder. You did a brave thing today. I heard him. You were honest with him. That is not the same thing. It feels the same right now. She turned to look at him, studying his profile in the firelight. My father said he saw the way you look at me. What did he mean? Morgan was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. Then he said softly, he meant that I am not as good at hiding my feelings as I thought I was. What feelings? Come on, Dawson. You are smart enough to figure it out. Her heart was suddenly beating too fast. I want to hear you say it. He turned to face her, and in his eyes she saw everything she had been hoping for and half afraid to name. From the moment you rode into my camp and asked me to help you fight your father, I have been drawn to you. Your courage, your stubbornness, the way you do not back down from anything. I told myself it was just admiration, that it would pass. But every day I spend watching you work, watching you learn, watching you become exactly who you are supposed to be, it gets harder to pretend. Pretend what? That I am not falling for you. The words hung between them like a promise and a question. Dawson felt something shift inside her, all the scattered pieces of her heart rearranging themselves into a pattern that made sudden, perfect sense. Then stop pretending. Morgan leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away, but she met him halfway. His kiss was gentle at first, questioning, but when she pressed closer it deepened into something that stole her breath and made the world spin. He tasted like coffee and wood smoke, and his hand came up to cup her cheek with a tenderness that made her chest ache. When they finally broke apart she was shaking, her forehead rested against his. That was my first kiss. Good. I plan to be your last one too." She laughed, breathless and giddy. "Pretty confident, are you not? Hopeful. There is a difference." He pulled back enough to look at her properly. "But I am serious, Dawson. I am not looking for a trail romance or something casual. If we do this, I want all of you. And I want you to have all of me." "What does that look like? You are a trail boss. You spend half your life driving cattle from one end of the country to the other." "For now, yes. But I have been saving money, putting aside every dollar I can spare. In a few years, I will have enough to buy my own land, start my own ranch. I have always dreamed of settling somewhere in Colorado or Wyoming, high country with good grass and clean water." He took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "I am not asking you to give up your dreams for mine. I am asking if we can build something together. I do not know what my dreams are yet. That is why I left. Then we will figure them out together. No promises, no pressure. Just see where this goes." Dawson looked at him, this serious young man with weathered hands and kind eyes, who had taken her seriously when everyone else dismissed her, who had stood between her and her father's rifle and never once asked her to be anything other than herself. She thought about the future he was offering, wild and uncertain and completely different from the safe life her father had planned. And she realized that for the first time in her life, she was not afraid. "All right, let us see where this goes." They sat by the fire until it burned down to embers, talking about everything and nothing, learning the shape of each other's dreams. By the time they finally sought their bedrolls, the stars were wheeling toward morning, and Dawson felt like she was seeing them clearly for the first time. The drive continued south, the days falling into a rhythm of riding and resting, moving and making camp. But now there was an undercurrent of awareness between her and Morgan, 1,000 small moments that added up to something larger than their parts. The way his hand would brush hers when passing a canteen. The smile he saved just for her when no one else was looking. The conversations late at night by the fire, when the rest of the outfit was asleep and they could be just Morgan and Dawson instead of boss and hand. The other men noticed, of course. It was impossible to keep secrets in such close quarters. But no one said anything negative, and gradually Dawson realized that they approved, that they saw in Morgan the same qualities she did, and thought she was good for him. Garrett was the first to say anything directly. They were riding swing together, keeping an eye on a group of steers that kept trying to break from the main herd, and he leaned over in his saddle and grinned at her. "You know, the boss has been different since you joined up." "Different how?" "Lighter, I guess. Like he is not carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders all the time. That is a good thing, in case you were wondering." "I was not." "Sure you were not." His grin widened. "For what it is worth, I think you are good together. He needs someone who is not afraid to challenge him, and you need someone who is not afraid of your challenges. When did you become an expert on relationships?" "When I spent 6 months watching Morgan drive himself into the ground trying to prove he is the best trail boss in Texas." "You are the first thing I have seen that makes him remember there is more to life than work." Garrett tipped his hat and spurred his horse forward to head off a wandering steer. "Just thought you should know." They crossed into Texas in late October, the landscape shifting again to rolling plains dotted with mesquite and live oak. The weather turned colder, the nights crisp with the promise of winter, and Morgan started pushing the herd harder to reach the winter range before the first serious storm. They were still 2 weeks out when the sky turned gray and heavy, the air tasting of snow. "We need to find shelter," Morgan told Cole as they studied the horizon. "There is a line shack about 10 miles east, if I remember right. We can hold the herd in the valley there and wait out the worst of it." They reached the line shack just as the first flakes started to fall, fat and wet and heavy. The shack was barely standing, Just 4 walls and a roof with gaps that let in the wind, but it was better than nothing. They crowded the horses into a makeshift corral and bedded the cattle down in a natural amphitheater of rock that offered some protection from the wind. By nightfall, the snow was coming down in sheets, a full blizzard that reduced visibility to arm's length. The men huddled in the shack, packed shoulder to shoulder for warmth, while Morgan and Cole took turns checking on the herd. Dawson tried to stay awake, tried to be useful, but exhaustion dragged her down into fitful sleep. She woke to find Morgan shaking her shoulder, his face pale with cold. "I need you to come with me. Some of the cattle broke loose and headed for the ravine. If they go over the edge, they will take half the herd with them." She stumbled to her feet, her limbs stiff and clumsy, and followed him out into the storm. The wind hit like a fist, stealing her breath and her sense of direction. She could see nothing beyond the snow, just white chaos that howled and spun. Morgan grabbed her hand and pulled her forward, and she concentrated on putting one foot in front of the other. They found the cattle bunched at the edge of the ravine, their eyes rolling white with panic. Morgan shouted something she could not hear over the wind, then moved to circle around behind them. Dawson understood what he wanted, moved to flank them from the other side. Together they started pushing the cattle back toward the main herd, using their horses to block and turn. It was brutal, exhausting work. The cattle did not want to move, kept trying to bolt back toward the ravine. Morgan's horse slipped on the icy ground and nearly went down, and for one heart-stopping moment Dawson thought they were going to lose him over the edge. But he recovered, pulled his horse back from the brink, and kept pushing. Finally, after what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, they got the cattle moving in the right direction. They hazed them back to the shelter of the rocks and the rest of the herd, then turned their horses toward the shack. Dawson was shaking so hard she could barely hold the reins, her hands numb inside her gloves, her face burning with cold. They stumbled into the shack, and Morgan immediately started stripping off her wet clothes, his hands efficient and impersonal. "You are half frozen. We need to get you warm." Someone handed him dry blankets and he wrapped her in them, then pulled her against his chest and held her while the shivers racked her body. Gradually, the warmth of his body and the blankets started to seep into her bones, and the shaking subsided. "That was foolish," he said into her hair. "I should not have taken you out there. I am fine. You could have died. We both could have. But we did not. We saved the cattle and we came back. That is what matters." She pulled back enough to look at him. "This is the life you chose, Morgan. Danger and risk and fighting storms in the middle of nowhere. If I am going to share that life, you cannot protect me from it. I know. It does not mean I like it. I do not need you to like it. I need you to trust me." He studied her face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "All right. But if you ever scare me like that again, I reserve the right to hold you until the shaking stops. Deal." The storm lasted 3 days, pinning them in the shack with dwindling supplies and rising tensions. On the second day, 2 of the men got into a fight over nothing, just nerves and cabin fever, and Morgan had to physically separate them. On the 3rd day, the wind finally died down and the snow stopped falling, leaving the world buried under 2 feet of white. They dug out slowly, checking the herd and assessing the damage. They had lost a dozen head to the cold and another 5 that had wandered off and frozen, but it could have been worse. Much worse. Morgan looked like he had aged 10 years, the weight of responsibility etched deep in the lines around his eyes. They pushed on as soon as the trails were passable, racing the calendar to get the herd to winter range. By the time they finally reached the valley Morgan had been aiming for, it was mid-November and everyone was running on fumes. But they had made it, had delivered the herd intact despite everything the trail had thrown at them. Morgan paid off the crew and gave them leave to head into town, but Dawson stayed behind with him and Cole to make sure the cattle settled. They spent 2 days riding the perimeter of the valley, checking water and grass, making sure there were no gaps in the natural barriers that kept the herd contained. On the 3rd day, Morgan asked her to ride with him to a spot he wanted to show her. They left Cole to watch the herd and rode east into the hills, following a game trail that climbed steadily. The air was thin and cold, the sky impossibly blue, and Dawson could see for miles from the higher ridges. Morgan finally stopped at a plateau overlooking a small valley with a creek running through it. The grass was thick and golden, the water clear and fast, and the whole place had a feeling of peace that made her chest tighten. "This is it," Morgan said quietly. "This is where I want to build." "It is beautiful. It is more than that. It is perfect. Good water, good grass, sheltered from the worst of the winter storms. I could run 500 head here easy, maybe more if I manage it right." He dismounted and walked to the edge of the plateau, looking out over the valley. "I have been scouting land for 3 years, looking for the right place. The moment I saw this, I knew." Dawson joined him, standing close enough that their shoulders touched. "Have you made an offer?" "Not yet. I am still about $2,000 short of what I need. But I have been talking to the bank in Abilene, and they are willing to work with me. Another year, maybe 2, and I will have enough." He turned to face her, his expression serious. "I want you to see it because I want you to know what I am working toward. If you and I are going to build something together, this is where it starts. You are asking me to wait 2 years. I am asking if you think this is worth waiting for, worth working for." He took her hands, his grip warm and steady. "I know we have not known each other long. I know you are still figuring out who you are and what you want, but I also know that what I feel for you is real and it is not going away. So I am asking, Dawson Carter, if you can see yourself here, with me, building a life that we choose together." She looked out at the valley, at the dream he was offering her, and felt something slot into place in her heart. This was not the life her father had wanted for her, safe and predictable behind white fences. This was wild and hard and uncertain, a future written in sweat and dust and hope. But it was theirs, something they could build from scratch, and that made all the difference. "Yes, I can see it." Morgan's face broke into a smile that transformed him, made him look young and unguarded and completely happy. He pulled her into his arms and kissed her there on the plateau, with the valley spread out below them and the whole future waiting. They spent the winter in a small town outside Fort Worth, taking odd jobs and saving money. Dawson worked in the general store and the hotel kitchen, learning the rhythms of town life, while Morgan hired on with a local rancher to help with winter feeding. It was strange after months on the trail, being in one place and sleeping in a real bed, but there was a comfort to it too. They courted properly, by the standards of 1882 Texas, attending church socials and taking walks along the river. Morgan was careful to maintain appearances, never alone with her unchaperoned, always respectful of propriety. But there were moments when the mask slipped, when his eyes would find hers across a crowded room, and she would see the heat behind the careful politeness. In March, she received a letter from her father. It was short and stiff, asking how she was and when she planned to come home. She wrote back and told him about Morgan, about the valley and the ranch they were planning, about the life she was building. His response took 6 weeks to arrive, and when it came, it was warmer than she expected. "I cannot say I understand your choices, but I can see that you have thought them through. If this cowboy of yours makes you happy, then I suppose I can learn to live with it. But I still expect you home for a visit before the year is out. Your old father is not getting any younger, and I would like to meet the man who stole my daughter." Morgan took the letter in stride, though she could see the tension in his shoulders when he read it. "I suppose I should be grateful he is not threatening to shoot me anymore. That is progress. For my father, that is practically a blessing." They spent the spring gathering supplies and making plans. Morgan finalized the bank loan for the land and filed a claim on the valley, making it officially his. Dawson learned everything she could about ranching, reading books and asking questions and absorbing information like a sponge. She wanted to be a full partner in what they were building, not just a wife who watched from the sidelines. In May, they hired a crew and started building the ranch house. It was a simple structure, just 3 rooms and a wide porch, but it was solid and well-made and entirely theirs. Dawson worked alongside the men, hammering and sawing and hauling lumber, and at night she would collapse into bed with her muscles aching and her heart full. Morgan proposed on the night they finished the roof, kneeling in the sawdust of their unfinished living room with a simple gold band. "I do not have much to offer you except this land and my whole heart, but if that is enough, I would be honored if you would marry me." "Yes," she said, pulling him to his feet and into her arms. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." They married in June, a simple ceremony in the chapel in Fort Worth with Garrett and Cole standing as witnesses. Dawson wore a dress she had sewn herself, pale blue calico that brought out the color of her eyes, and Morgan wore his best suit with a string tie and polished boots. They spoke their vows in front of a justice of the peace, promising to love and honor and build a life together, and when Morgan kissed her as his wife she felt like she was finally, completely home. Her father came to visit in August, riding up to the ranch house with the same wary expression he had worn when he tracked her down at the trading post a year before. But when he saw the ranch, saw what they had built from nothing, something in his face softened. "You did this yourself." "We had help, but yes, this is ours." Samuel Carter walked around the property, taking in the house and the barns and the corrals, the garden Dawson had planted and the cattle grazing in the valley. When he finally came back to where Morgan and Dawson stood on the porch, his eyes were bright with something that might have been pride. "You chose well, daughter. Not the life I would have picked for you, but you chose well." "Thank you, Daddy. That means more than you know." He stayed for a week, working alongside them to finish the barn and meeting the hands Morgan had hired for the fall roundup. By the time he left, he and Morgan had reached an understanding, the kind that came from shared work and mutual respect. It was not friendship, not yet, but it was a start. The ranch prospered slowly, the way all good things do. They built their herd carefully, buying quality stock and breeding for hardiness and temperament. Morgan proved to be as good a rancher as he had been a trail boss, with an eye for cattle and a head for business that kept them profitable even in lean years. Dawson managed the house and the books, kept the garden and the chickens, and learned to love the rhythm of ranch life. In the spring of 1884, she told Morgan she was pregnant. He picked her up and spun her around, whooping with joy, then set her down carefully as if she might break. She laughed and swatted his arm. "I am pregnant, not made of glass. You can still touch me. I know, I just want to be careful." "You can be careful without being ridiculous." Their son was born in December, a healthy boy with Morgan's dark hair and Dawson's stubborn chin. They named him Matthew Samuel Zane, honoring both their fathers, and Dawson thought her heart might burst when she saw Morgan holding his son for the first time, his face soft with wonder. Her father came for the birth and stayed through Christmas, rocking his grandson by the fire and telling stories about Dawson's mother. It was the first time he had talked about her in years, and Dawson treasured every word, filing them away to tell Matthew when he was older. The years unfolded like pages in a book, each one marked by small victories and ordinary joys. They added rooms to the house as the family grew, a daughter named Diana in 1886 and another son, Michael, in 1888. The ranch expanded, the herd growing to 700 head and then 1,000. They hired more hands, built a second barn, dug a well that never ran dry even in drought years. There were hard times too. Winters that killed livestock and summers that scorched the grass brown. Market crashes that drove beef prices down and made every dollar count. Morgan's father died in 1887, and they made the long trip to Texas for the funeral, returning with Morgan's younger brother who wanted to learn ranching. Dawson's father grew old and frail, and eventually she convinced him to sell his farm in Kansas and come live with them, spending his final years watching his grandchildren grow. But through it all, through the good years and the hard ones, through the growing and the grieving, Dawson and Morgan held fast to each other. Their love deepened with time, weathered by shared hardship and sweetened by shared joy, until she could not remember a time when he had not been the center of her world. One evening in the summer of 1895, when the children were grown enough to handle the evening chores and the sun was painting the valley gold and crimson, Morgan found Dawson sitting on the porch and held out his hand. "Come for a ride with me." "Where to?" "Just up to the plateau. I want to see the sunset from there." They rode together through the familiar landscape, past the barns and corrals, up the game trail to the place where Morgan had first shown her his dream. The valley spread below them, prosperous and green, dotted with cattle and the buildings they had raised with their own hands. In the distance she could see their children, Matthew helping with the horses while Deanna herded chickens and Michael played with the ranch dogs. 13 years, Morgan said quietly. 13 years since I showed you this place and asked if you could see yourself here. Best decision I ever made, even when I am old and gray and cranky, especially then. She leaned against him, fitting into the curve of his shoulder the way she had 1,000 times before. "You know what I think about sometimes? That day you rode onto my father's land and he shot at you. What would have happened if you had just kept riding, if we had never met? I try not to think about that. It makes me dizzy, all the ways things could have gone differently. I would have stayed on that farm, married some shopkeeper my father approved of, lived a safe, small life and never known what I was missing." She turned to look at him, this man who had given her everything by believing she could be more than what others expected. "You saved me, Morgan Zane." "No, you saved yourself. I just gave you a chance to do it." They watched the sun sink below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple and deep twilight blue. When the first stars appeared, Morgan pulled her closer, and they sat in comfortable silence while the night settled around them. "You know what I love most about this life?" Dawson asked after a while. "What?" "That we chose it. Every bit of it. The hard parts and the easy parts, the successes and the failures. We chose each other and we chose this place and we built something that is completely, perfectly ours." She took his hand, lacing their fingers together. "I spent so much of my life trying to escape my father's plans for me, but what I really wanted was not escape. It was this. A partner who sees me, who trusts me, who builds with me instead of for me. You make me sound noble. Most days I am just trying to keep the cattle fed and the books balanced. That is what makes you noble. You show up every day and do the work. You keep your promises. You build the life you said you would build." She kissed him softly, a gentle press of lips that held 13 years of love and trust. "I could not have asked for a better partner. Neither could I." They rode back down to the ranch as the stars came out in full force, the Milky Way blazing overhead just as it had that night she rode away from her father's farm. But now, instead of riding toward an uncertain future, she was riding home, toward the life she and Morgan had created together. And she knew, with a certainty that went bone deep, that this was exactly where she belonged. The years continued to pass, marked by the changing of seasons and the growing of children into adults. Matthew proved to have his father's gift with cattle and his mother's head for business, taking over more of the ranch management as Morgan's back grew stiff and his joints ached on cold mornings. Deanna shocked everyone by deciding she wanted to study medicine, and Morgan and Dawson scraped together the money to send her to the Women's Medical College in Kansas City. Michael split his time between the ranch and the local school, teaching children to read and write with a patience his siblings lacked. In 1902, on their 20th anniversary, Morgan and Dawson rode back up to the plateau where he had first shown her the valley. They were older now, their hair streaked with gray and their faces lined with weather and laughter, but the love between them was as strong as ever. 20 years, Dawson marveled. How did we get so old? By being too stubborn to die. Morgan grinned at her, that same smile that had made her heart skip when she was 19. Think you can handle another 20, at least. I am planning to be an insufferable old woman who orders everyone around and tells long, boring stories about the old days. I cannot wait. They sat together as the sun set, watching their grandchildren play in the yard below. Matthew had married a girl from town and already had 2 children of his own, carrying on the legacy they had started. The ranch was thriving, the family was healthy, and the valley was still the most beautiful place Dawson had ever seen. You ever regret it? Morgan asked. Leaving your father's farm, running away to chase a dream that might not have worked out, not once, not even on the hardest days. Dawson took his hand, feeling the familiar calluses and the strength that age had not diminished. This life with you has been everything I hoped for and more than I could have imagined. If I had it to do over, I would make the same choice every single time. Good. Because I would not trade you for all the cattle in Texas. Smooth talker. I learned from the best. As the stars began to appear overhead, Dawson thought about that young girl who had climbed onto a horse in the middle of the night and ridden toward an uncertain future. She had been so brave and so terrified, so desperate to prove she could choose her own path. And now, looking back across 20 years of marriage and partnership and love, she could see that it had all been worth it. Every hard day, every moment of doubt, every sacrifice and struggle had led her here, to this moment, with this man, in this place they had built together. Her father had sworn he would shoot any cowboy on his land. She had sworn she would marry one anyway. And in the end, they had both been right in their own way. Samuel Carter had protected what he loved the best way he knew how, and Dawson had fought for her right to choose. But love, real love, had been bigger than both their stubbornness, big enough to bridge the gap between what was expected and what was possible. As they rode back down to the ranch, the lights from the house glowing warm and welcoming in the darkness, Dawson felt a peace settle over her that went deeper than contentment. This was home. This was family. This was the life she had chosen, and she would not change a single thing. Morgan helped her down from her horse and pulled her into his arms, holding her close the way he had 1,000 times before. I love you, Dawson Zane. I love you too, Cowboy. Always have, always will. And under the wide Kansas sky, with the ranch they had built surrounding them and the future stretching out bright and full of promise, Dawson knew that some promises were worth keeping forever. She had sworn she would marry a cowboy, and she had. But more than that, she had found a partner, a friend, a love that had weathered every storm and emerged stronger for it. The Wild West was changing, giving way to fenced ranges and railroad towns and the slow march of civilization. But here, in this valley, on this ranch, the spirit of those frontier days lived on, in the courage to choose your own path, in the willingness to work for what you wanted, in the understanding that the best things in life were worth fighting for, worth building, worth protecting. And as Dawson and Morgan walked hand in hand toward their house, toward their family, toward all the days they had yet to live together, she sent up a silent prayer of gratitude. For the father who had loved her enough to let her go. For the cowboy who had seen her for who she really was. And for the life they had built together, one day, one choice, one promise at a time. The story that had begun with a gunshot and a defiant girl on horseback had become something bigger than either of them. It had become a legacy of love and hard work, of dreams made real through determination and partnership. And when their grandchildren asked how Grandma and Grandpa had met, they would tell them the truth. That once upon a time, in the Wild West of 1882, a girl decided she was done living by someone else's rules. She rode out into the unknown with nothing but courage and hope, and she found a cowboy who saw in her everything she could become. Together they built a ranch, raised a family, and loved each other through all the days of their lives. It was not always easy. It was rarely simple, but it was theirs, and that made it perfect. And they lived happily ever after, exactly as they had promised each other they would, in that valley under the endless sky, where dreams came true for those brave enough to chase them.